Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 27th of March. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Donetsk and a little bit about Bakhmut. So let's begin by talking about the situation around Marinka and Popieda. So this did not actually occur today or yesterday. It's just something that I noticed while I was looking through the map and trying to make edits to the front line around Marinka and Popieda. I just noticed that apparently the Russians had been able to advance from some of their positions along the 00532 road, which is basically the one that links up with Drewsby Avenue. If you see over here, this is Drewsby Avenue. It links up with Drewsby Avenue and then crosses through Popieda. So they had positions along this road because there were some trenches that were adjacent to it. So the Russians, they were able to consolidate their gains over there and advance to the south and take over the first parts of the agricultural facilities in the eastern part of Popieda. Now, the way I'm describing this, it just really goes to show how insignificant the gains are in this area because they're so minuscule, because I'm talking about a fraction of a town being taken, but it is significant in regards to this really micro level of fighting. So now the Russians, they have control over this farm over here, and they can begin to go block by block, clearing out the town of Popieda. Now, at this point, Popieda has probably really suffered so much destruction that it can't really be considered a town anymore. But you still have some fortified positions in there and trenches and stuff. So the Russians still need to clear it if they want to advance further. But let's look at Marinka, where we do have some news. I didn't really change the front line because I had done so before we received reports that Russia advanced deeper into the town. So maybe my mapping was a bit too generous to the Russians in that regard. But what we're hearing is that the Russians advanced in southern Marinka. They were able to take over every single part of Marinka to the east of Drewsby Avenue, which is the main road dividing the town, although at this point in time most of the town is just flattened, and so there isn't much of a town left to talk about. And then also in the north, they were able to enter Ivana Franka Street and take over much of it, taking over a lot of the northern part of the town. And so yeah, you've seen some progress over here for the Russians. In terms of the units involved, well, we have the 150th Motor Rifle Division. That's really the Russian vanguard. And then in terms of the DPR vanguard, you have the Upload 5th Separate Infantry Brigade. They've been heavily involved, and at the same time, these vanguard assault forces, they receive support from Russian artillery, 152 millimeter D-20 howitzers, and these are usually camouflaged in some sort of firing position to the east, obviously, of Marinka. I don't know exactly where, but it is significant in the sense that now Russia is beginning to really attack both the northern and southern flanks of Marinka. They've finally been able to reach Drewsby Avenue and clear out some of the Ukrainian fortified positions over there. The fighting is house to house, so it is very notable. And then in the north, to the north of Marinka and the residential areas, there's also fighting in the warehouses, some apartment buildings in here. But I don't believe that Marinka will fall anytime soon as long as the supply routes into the town are still standing, because it really has turned into a strong Ukrainian defensive node where basically every single block is a layer that has to be overrun individually, and there's no way around it unless you cut off the supply lines that reinforce the Ukrainians with men and equipment. And so when we're looking at supply lines, one is Ivano-Franka, and then there's the other one, which is Kashtanova Street, which leads into the center of Marinka. So those are the two main routes, and if Russia wants to finally take over what's left of the town, they need to cut these two supply lines. If we go to the north, the Russians, using their positions in Stara Mikhailivka, they were able to take over some trenches adjacent to Krasnohorovka, and so now the front line has shifted a bit closer to the town, although I doubt any sort of frontal assault on Krasnohorovka would be successful at the moment. Fighting is now going on at the outskirts of the city. If we go up to the situation around Avdiivka, situation is getting more and more difficult for the Ukrainian defenders as time goes on, although it could be worse, obviously, because you still have a large Ukrainian contingent that's being supplied through pretty open supply lines at the moment, although Russia's trying to change that. If we go to southern Avdiivka, no Russian gains in this area. Russians try to conduct assaults towards the south, advancing along the T-05 road, but that failed. The 110th Mechanized Brigade put a stop to any sort of Russian advance in this direction. The Russians, they were able to take over Kamyanka, though. This is because it was just basically like a bridge too far for Ukraine. They couldn't hold on to it anymore. The main contingent was in Avdiivka, and there was no way to support the Ukrainian forces on Kamyanka anymore. They were too isolated from the main defending force. And so I would say that most of the Ukrainian defenders are now within the city itself, and they may even begin to withdraw from the suburbs in the coming weeks. If we go to the north, the Russians have not made any sort of confirmed gains yet, just to the west of the Krasnohorovka. So their advances from previous days seem to have stalled. They are using incendiary munitions to attack the coke plant and the chemical plants in this area. So we saw some footage of that. There was some very heavy shelling and bombing of the city. And this is pretty significant now because the Ukrainians are beginning to evacuate civilians from Avdiivka. They've banned entry of civilians back into the town. They're taking out utility workers from Avdiivka, and they're going to cut the mobile reception in Avdiivka in the coming days. So that indicates that the Ukrainians are preparing to turn this into a fortress. So they want to evacuate the civilians, and they just want to be left alone over there. As the situation becomes more tense, that's not a good sign, and it just shows that Avdiivka is going to turn into basically another Marinka, another Popasna, another, Rubizhny, any of these like large urban clusters that were turned into fortresses that were fought over for a long time. I guess the difference is if Russia's able to secure their flanks and isolate it, maybe then that can sort of obviate some of the urban warfare. But let's go up to the situation in Bakhmut. So I have some new geolocated footage that we will analyze. First of all, we have a situation around Korsunskoye streets. Nothing has changed yet. We have a big reason for this being that there's 12 high-rise apartment buildings. I think they're 6 or 7 stories high. This cluster over here, you see, you actually have a lot of Ukrainian forces stuck in here. And they have snipers, they have ATGMs, they have enough ammo to hold out. And good luck advancing through a narrow road or through some open field towards like the residential areas over here when you have Ukrainian forces sniping at you from a roof or from a 6th-story building. It's not a good idea. And so any sort of advance along this direction is basically impossible as long as the Ukrainians hold their positions in these apartment buildings. And so how do you clear them out? Well, you probably have to take over the school over here first and then somehow break through. Russia should be utilizing its advantage in artillery and aviation to take over these apartment buildings, but in the meantime, it stalled any sort of advance in this direction. We have some footage to back this up of Ukrainian snipers hitting the Wagner group as they were trying to furtively advance across Korsunskoye Street. That failed. And then if we go over here, we have this video I already showed, but it was like Ukrainian troops like gathering around the apartment building and entering it. Here we have one of house fighting. That's old. Let's go to the situation in the southern part of Bakhmut. The Russians, they were able to make some gains towards the Shiroka Streets. Shiroka Streets is sort of like a dividing line between one set of houses and then the other one, and there's like some car repair store in between. And also Shiroka Street links up with Mariupolska Street, so it is sort of like the de facto current like front line, you could say. And so everything to the south and to the east, to the west of these roads has been cleared out by the Russians. They just have to focus on taking the northern parts now. And the Russians, they've been able to secure this plot of land that includes several facilities and structures and buildings. That was originally a gray zone in my last video, and now it's been taken over by the Russians. So the dividing line is fully on Mariupolska streets. But here we have a video of the Ukrainians shelling the Russian positions, which proves that this is the current front line, but it does show that Ukraine still does have some artillery capabilities that is slowing down the Russian advance. And they also have some counter battery fire that's been pretty significant in recent days, so they're trying to attack the Russian artillery. That's sort of mitigate the sort of like overmatch that Russia has in artillery compared to Ukraine. What else do we have here? Here we have a Ukrainian firing an ATGM onto Russian forces. I saw the video. I wasn't able to get a glimpse of the Russian forces though. I don't know if they were firing to the south towards like a Russian contingent here, or if they were firing across the river. I heard in the post that it was across the river, but it's also possible that they were firing to the south, or that there was some like fighting to the south, because when the camera was pointed at this southern part over here at these facilities that I have marked under Russian control, basically the entire thing was in ruins, which shows that there was some like heavy fighting going on in that direction. You can see these are some like larger structures. They're not just one story in size. These are some like pretty large stores and shops and different facilities and warehouses, and so it is a good area to sort of stage firing positions in and attack your opposition. If we zoom out, we could go to the center of the city. Here we have I want to try to find the video. There was a pretty interesting video that I wanted to show. I might not be able to find it right now. I think it's this one, but I don't know why there's no caption for it or whatever. But what I was going to say about this video is that it showed like Ukrainian units trying to advance and to reorganize in the center of the city, and you can see that most of the buildings there are still standing. They're still pretty durable, so there isn't that much destruction. Obviously they've been shelled and there's like a lot of debris on the floor, but it doesn't really restrict any sort of operations. And then in the background, you see at the beginning of the video a tank rolling through and making noise, so you know it's a Ukrainian tank. So that's interesting. Ukraine does still have a certain amount of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles in the city, although I would say their numbers are small. I don't know which tank it was, maybe a T-62 or a T-72, but I'll link that video. So now let's go on to the final part of Bakhmut. We have the Azom Industrial District. Remember when the front line looked like this basically 2 days ago? Well, I was saying that Ukraine was scaling back its operations in this area, and that was beginning to withdraw men. That turned out to be true, and within the 24 hours after that video, the Ukrainians fully withdrew their forces from these facilities in southern Azom, and also from some residential areas adjacent to it. So the new front line really looks something like this, where it's really centered around now some other facilities to the south of Azom, including the rail line and some administrative buildings, and then also this residential area over here that needs to be cleared out. And so you're seeing how all of the Ukrainian forces are some sort of like forming one sort of tight conglomeration in the center of the city, and so that's going to be a problem for Russia as they close in on the city center, because really the flanks, we have not seen much. I'm hearing a lot from people, especially in the comments, saying that the Russians are intentionally leaving the routes open in Kromove and Ivanivske in order to give Ukrainians this sense that they could retreat, and then as they retreat, they get fired upon and destroyed. It's basically like Mongol war tactics, where you leave one route open and then destroy all of your opposition in that specific sector. I can believe that to a certain extent, but I'll also say that Russia has been actively assaulting both of these roads, and we have reports of this from both sides, and we've seen that those have largely turned out as failures. So perhaps it's sort of both. Both could be true at the same time. Maybe Russia is prioritizing it less now, and they're shifting towards just advancing in the city center, or maybe they are actively trying to assault the roads but are failing to make any headway. Either way, we know now that the Wagner Group, they are still fighting. A lot of the media reports that I've seen published on Russian TV still show Wagner fighters advancing, but we've seen a lot of the VDV units, some of them originally from Kherson, that have been moved to the fighting in the city, and now they have a pretty large presence. And so that implies that the Wagner Group have suffered a certain level of losses that can't be replaced within their own ranks. So the Russians need to move in their paratroopers into this area, but they're not really like paratroopers in the sense, because they're not really being dropped from any sort of aviation in Bakhmut. They're just sort of acting as infantry So here you have several units, including the 137th Guards Airborne Regiment, the 98th Guards Airborne Division, and the 108th Guards Air Assault Regiment, and 106th Guards Airborne Division. These are just some of the Russian units that have been moved in recent days and months, actually, to help reinforce the Wagner Group as they continue their advance. So that's all for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.